I'm going to pry myself away from looking at saddest movie moment compilations and clips from the Lord of the Rings to record a Q&A for you guys. Hello everyone. Last week we did a bunch of questions I know that have come up many times before, fairly popular questions. This week I'm just going to pick a whole bunch and not really discriminate too much on which ones I choose. So if you have any questions of your own, just leave them in the comments on this video, and next time I go to record a Q&A, I will be looking in that comment section for stuff to pick. I always choose the older ones before the new ones too, so the earlier you put your question in, the more likely it is to actually come up. Footage in the background will probably be me playing my Sylvari more. Again, likely to be personal story. I think personal story is probably going to be like the background stuff for this series in the end. I was told by many of you that I look awesome, which is great because many of my guildies were mocking my amazing looking Sylvari. I was told I look a bit like Azog, a bit like a Ninja Turtle, Voldemort. Either way, I was trying to make him look like a Warden, which I guess we have a question on later anyway, but that's kind of the idea there. So anyway, the first one's from SlayerLord13, who says, I have a question. Do you think it would be possible to have a Mega Boss type event which isn't focused on a single boss? I'm thinking rather a defend event, but of the difficulty and scale of a Mega Boss. I think, honestly, when you try and push world events like this into that kind of hardcore territory, there absolutely are going to be a lot more objectives than just killing one boss, right? That's where a lot of the difficulty comes from. That's where a lot of the engagement with the event lies. Otherwise, you're just hacking away at something shin. Like, you can look at Tequatl, and yeah, it's just one boss we're fighting, but the devs appreciated that that would be boring as sin if the entire thing was just a stack fest in front of one of his feet until eventually he died. You know, it's all just one big DPS gate, basically. They appreciated that, and they put other bits to the event. You know, there are moments where Tequatl flies off and you're defending all the batteries, and yeah, nowadays Tequatl is horrifically easy. It is nothing like the content it should be, but you know, this keeps that engagement there, and really that's not just one big boss, that's a lot of smaller events that all come together. Worm's an even better example, you know. I think one of the main reasons they split Worm into 3 different bosses that you all fight at once is because of lag. I know that they are much better with server lag now. If you guys remember when Tech first came out, most of the time, for a long time after Guild Wars 2 launched, if you had a huge number of people and they all popped stuff like fire ellie powers and stuff, the lag was just ridiculous, and you don't really get that anymore. Some of that it is that they've improved their servers, but some of it is they're just designing content a little bit better. It seems that if people are more spread out around the map, and I'm not talking about FPS lag necessarily here, though that does come into it, I'm talking more about network lag, then it actually eases things up. The less people you have all wailing on one specific target, the better. And so we come to the Evolved Jungle Worm, the only other really decent event that they ever did, and you can see that we're not fighting one boss. I mean, in lore technically it's supposed to be the same thing, but we're fighting 3 different bosses, again with multiple mechanics and different events that all chain together. So not only would I say that they can do it, I would say it's absolutely necessary that they do it. It is a goddamn shame that the Shatterer hasn't received an update, and neither has Jormag. Why? Because I guess they've decided that the Mega Bosses aren't worth it. We've had this discussion before. I think if it comes down to a flimsy as a reason as, oh, well, at least Tech had a reason because, you know, Zaitan died and then all the magic went into him and he got more powerful. You know, that's one thing. And now what are they saying? Oh, because Kraukatorik's not very active, they don't want to go and revamp him. It doesn't have to be tied to Living Story. Please just improve these events. In particular with Jormag, I have like all these crazy grand ideas in my head about the way that it could work. You know, be this whole map-wide thing where multiple events across all different sectors. That giant dredge factory could be like heavily tied into manufacturing weapons so that you could actually take out Jormag. It would just be incredible. A lot of people ask me if I could go and like work for ArenaNet, what would I do? Like, where would I most like to have input on the game? And honestly, it depends what day you catch me on, but I think at the very top of my list would be something like designing some of these new Mega Bosses, really improving these things. And definitely, it cannot just be one boss the entire time. It's going to be lots of events, lots of components. And it can remain fun, even stuff like escorts. You know, look at Balthazar. Again, it's not the hardest thing in the world, but just that pure failure chance, you know, the event will fail if you do not escort these people properly, makes it actually a lot more difficult than the rest of the content there. And that's an escort event. That's not fighting a boss, that's just an escort. What you really need is that failure state, and a lot of the stuff they've already got can work wonders. Anyway, so let's move on. The next question is from Baron TV1, who says, an open world in Guild Wars 2 would be great, but I don't think it's possible. Do you think instead of being able to climb every mountain and sail every sea, it would be better to have loading hallways? I went back and started watching your Tomb Raider Let's Play, and the loading hallways seemed like a great idea. An open world without obvious loading screens, but still technically using maps and loading screens. What are your thoughts? I think this would be a great addition to a great game. Yeah, this is a really cool idea. The main reason I picked this question is because I'd like to bring the idea of loading hallways out to everyone in case you don't know what these are. They've been employed for a long time actually in games now, but the idea is, let's say you're making a big transition from Metrica Province to Brisbane Wildlands. In Guild Wars 2, you hit the portal and it just puts you into a dead loading screen, and the game just loads as much as it can, and then eventually you load in and there you go. Not very immersive. You can very much feel that you've just moved to a totally different map, connected to a different server, whatever. Well, the idea of loading hallways is instead of that loading screen, you just walk like through maybe a canyon or some winding hallway, small hallway that you can't really see any far in the distance, and in the background, the game is unloading the map you just came from and loading into the new map. So it's like an interactive loading screen, and they can be hidden very, very well. The last generation of Tomb Raider games, not the most recent one with Tomb Raider 2013, the last generation was very, very good at this. And yeah, it would be cool. The result would be that you're wandering around Tyria, and aside from the fact that you could clearly look at your map and see, oh, this is Caledon Forest, this is the area next to it, and everything's all these perfect rectangles, and there are only certain points of entry between maps. Aside from all of that, yeah, it'd be kind of cool. But I do think that other stuff drags it down, and on its own, it's pretty much not a worthwhile feature. If you think about technically what it would take for them to implement it, I think this would be very low on the list. It would be cool, but I really don't think we'd ever see it. And this is just me as a layman speculating. God knows how that would work server-side and stuff. What, are you disconnecting from the game completely while you're in the loading corridor and then reconnecting at some point, and it's all seamless? It's just not going to happen. Think about the way a lot of the other stuff in the game is structured too. Personal story instances, waypoints, entering into PvP matches. It's still going to be a game rampant with loading screens. So I just don't think that they're going to be able to emulate that open world feel. Guild Wars 2 has this thing about it, right? And that is that it has maps, and this is not something that will be very easily broken. I have always been very excited by the idea of Deljamore Front on the world map being added to Guild Wars 2 at some point, but it's all just one giant map, that entire huge square, basically like 6 current maps all jammed together in this massive glorious thing. But there are limits, right? When you do stuff like that, suddenly it's going to look really unpopulated because you can only have a certain amount of people on a map shard before it starts getting laggy. What if they, put a 600-man cap on this immense map? Okay, that's cool, but then these 600 people get together and just destroy the servers? It can't happen. Unless they have some, like, crazy reworks going on in the background. Unfortunately, I think we're always stuck to maps around the size we get. I do believe that they have genuinely always tried to make the maps as big as they possibly can. Living world stuff excluded, right, because obviously there's more constraints there. But certainly for launch, I think that they have always tried to make them as big as possible. You look at a Ra story, I think that is a huge, huge, huge map. It really is enormous. It's like 5 times the size at least of explorable Ra. But they can get away with that because it's an instance, and they know there will only ever be 5 people in there. At least that's my understanding of their technical limitations and why they can't do certain things. Maybe there's more to the story, but yeah. So yeah, I told you guys that we might have a question about the Wardens. This is from Agar666. Hey WP, what is your opinion on the Wardens? This is the race from Guild Wars 1 in the Echo Vale Forest. Do you think they'll make an appearance in Guild Wars 2, or do you think they got killed by the Deep Sea Dragon or his minions after Guild Wars 1? I've talked about the Wardens a lot on the channel. I believe that these are Sylvari, or, as it may end up turning out, minions of Mordramoth from a previous Rising, or, one of these trees have been planted in the Echo Vale. But I am also a little unsure if they will ever properly come into the story. Because this seems like one of those little things that ArenaNet might set up and then they'll just drop it, right? I have always maintained, though, one of the best reasons for us to go to Cantha is that this is a compelling argument for Sylvari characters to go to Cantha. You open up a new continent, and they're going to find it very important. I don't find this important, I will clarify, but they're going to find it very important that each of the 5 playable races has a good reason to go there, right? So they're going to have to come up with some excuse for why the Norm want to go there, and maybe that excuse is the same reason that the humans are going or whatever. But as many ties like that as they can build, the better. And for this reason, I do think the Wardens will be mentioned. But by the time we get there, maybe they have all been killed. Maybe there has been, mass destruction. The Echo Vale Forest should be coming back to life, though. So if anything, they should have flourished. And that's where the story could go in an interesting way. It's just you never really know with this kind of thing, especially since it's so far off. There is a fairly compelling argument that the Deep Sea Dragon defeated them. They are on their own out there. If they really are linked to Morgemoth, as perhaps our Sylvari are, then yeah, they're very disconnected. But then again, maybe that's a bit of a story for why we might go to Cantha sooner rather than later, because Morgemoth is going to fly off over there after being otherwise completely defeated by us, and flourish at his Warden Pale Tree, and, you know, creating new Ergos. How cool would that be? Anyway, so, interesting ideas. The next question is from Arthurus Silverthorn, who says, "Hey WP, why did you start a new Elementalist Sylvari rather than play through as a Guardian, since as far as we know, that's the last profession you've never played?" Yeah, Guardian is still the last profession I've never played. Well, I've played it, but only in PvP, and very briefly, and not really in any kind of PvE capacity. So yeah, I don't know very much about Guardian. I am still planning on getting a Guardian. I'm thinking it's going to be a Blood Legion, like, badass, heavy armor Char Guardian. But the main reason I have this Elementalist Sylvari now is because Elementalist Sylvaris have the maximum amount of invuln frames in the game, because Sylvari get Uproot, which summons a bunch of turrets as their elite, but while they're summoning them, they're invulnerable. So you can chain this with the Conjure Earth Shield 5, you can chain it with Obsidian Flesh, you can chain it with Mistform, you can chain it with Sons of Svanir runes or Vampirism runes, and just get this ridiculous invulnerability uptime. This has its use for, like, trolling in World vs. World, which I had a little bit of fun with the other day, but it also ties into a tactic at Worm, where you can block eggs and husks and spits and stuff by face tanking the Worm and then using these abilities, and that was something that I wanted to practice. I wanted a character that could do the very best. I never actually leveled this character. ArenaNet are testing something where they can, like, create high-level characters on accounts, so I helped them test that out by offering my account up, and this was the character that I requested, so it was actually a really good deal. And now I've been playing around with that. It is pretty fun to do it at Worm. I just wish the invulnerability chaining had more use, you know. Okay, so the next question is from Lias OS, who had a few questions. I'm just going to answer the first one, though. Who says, "Don't respawn timers also kill your immersion?" I mean, that was one thing I loved about Guild Wars 1. Some of those maps were downright difficult to get all the way through, but when you cleared it, it was cleared. More than that, the tactics of enemies in Guild Wars 1 is far more clever than the tactics in Guild Wars 2. I mean, mobs had defined routes to move on, and you knew how to read where their enemies were and how to attack them. The fact that you cannot actually implement large-scale tactics with a team makes Guild Wars 2 feel bland when compared to Guild Wars 1. You know, I've never really thought about this, but you are right that in GW1, because of the way those maps were structured and because it was all instanced, you did see more clever stuff coming from enemies. You're absolutely right. It was not uncommon for you to have an encounter. You know, you've got your party, you've got your team of players, heroes, henchmen, whatever, and you see all the Stone Summit or whatever over the hill, and you want to fight them. But as you go to engage, oh look, there's suddenly a ton of pop-ups have appeared around you, and now it's a disaster. You've got to back up, you've got to retreat, you've got to figure it out. Maybe you wipe, and then you have to rethink the encounter, or you push in, and oh look, God, there's a patrol coming around from the southwest, and you've got to clear this group really quickly, otherwise you're going to get attacked by 2 different groups at once. This whole patrolling thing was huge, and there isn't any of that in Guild Wars 2. You're damn right. Enemies just... It's so funny, because I remember when Guild Wars 2 was coming out, one of the main things they were talking about with dynamic events was how it stopped enemies walking around just picking daisies. And there's more of that in Guild Wars 2 than there was in Guild Wars 1. I'm sorry, I know that in Guild Wars 1, enemies would generally just be there for you to fight, and they weren't doing stuff on their own like they do in Guild Wars 2 with events. But they also had much more realistic patterns. You know, I remember very specifically around Anvil Rock, okay, near Icetooth Cave, in the original release of Prophecies, there was this huge map, all these lovely open fields, and it was a habitat for Minotaurs. And the Minotaurs you found on that map would have these huge patrols. They would be running around, actually rampaging around the map, doing what, and that was really interesting. That was genuinely immersive. It was frustrating for people who were trying to vanquish the map and couldn't find where the last enemies were, but that was much more immersive than you see anything in Guild Wars 2. There are no enemies that do that. And I don't know why they moved away from this. I struggle to think it's an oversight, because it was such a positive thing for the first game. I guess it's just they do have less control over their AI in this game. They seem to have so little. There are some AI routines that you can see in some places, like in Cordicus Manor, where enemies will actually flee when they take too much damage. But at some point, and I remember in early betas, the AI seemed to be a lot better. But they've just removed so much of that, and the AI is really, really quite terrible, I must be honest. Anyway, the original question was about respawn timers. I actually think they're more immersive. Yes, it was kind of cool. It was cool that in Guild Wars 1 you could spend like 5 hours in a single map and slowly kill everything there. And it was even cooler that when hard mode came out, you would get rewarded for that. And then boy, did that feel good when you actually managed to vanquish a map, didn't it? That was cool. But it's not necessarily more immersive, is it? I mean, having suddenly a completely empty map, knowing that there are only a finite amount of enemies there, it's kind of one of those things that reminds you you're playing a video game, rather than a situation where you feel like it's a real world and, you know, you can never kill all the deer in the forest, you can never hunt down all the rabbits. So, I do think respawn timers themselves are more immersive, but definitely the way that the AI works in Guild Wars 2, the way they have enemies set up, especially outside of instances, it's just, it's not that good. Even in dungeons, this whole patrolling thing is minimally done. Very minimally. So yeah. Next question is going to maybe sound like a brag, so I'm going to be very careful not to make it sound like that. It's from A Restless, who says, having watched many of your earlier videos recently and seeing how some of your speculation about events in Guild Wars 2 turned out to be right, do you think that devs or authors watch your videos or are influenced by them? I don't say that things happen in the living world just because you predicted them and people are simply copying your ideas, but I could totally imagine an author watching one of the Mysteries videos and saying, yeah, he's right, this might be a cool plot to expand. Honestly, I think this is incredibly unlikely. I don't think I influence anything. One thing you have to remember is a lot of the stuff I say is seeded from the community already, right? Like, I very rarely come up with purely original thoughts. A lot of the time, if I come to a conclusion, other people have come to that conclusion too, and maybe they've elaborated a little better, and maybe I'll have some kind of interesting take. But the reason people like some of the ideas I show on the channel is because they do tend to be fairly grounded, right? And that means a lot of other people have come up with it, and if you have a situation where a lot of people in the community are coming up with some fair speculation, you know, take like the Pale Tree as a champion of Morgemoth, right? That is a fair speculation. There are some very anal people who hate the idea, but ultimately this is a fair speculation. Many people have come up with it, and if you have a situation where lots of people are coming up with something like that, it means it was probably seeded there by the devs themselves, you know? I don't think that ArenaNet know everything they're doing with the story before they come up with it. I do think actually I would rather them to have a much more defined game plan going forward, though with Season 2 of The Living World it seems like they're finally getting there. It does seem like there have been big improvements on that front. But all of that said, I think personally, myself, I'm probably a very small cog in things. Sometimes you'll see me come out with very outlandish stuff, and the very outlandish stuff, while it may be exciting and while it may even make sense, best example is when I was predicting about Scarlet and the Aether Blades and how she was a time traveler from the Infinity Ball storyline with the Asura. Like, that was a cool theory! That never ended up happening, right? I actually have a bit of a reputation for coming out with cool stories that they never even do, that people would rather have seen these ones, kind of thing. So, yeah, I think really there's very little of that going on. And now that they've actually got a long-term plan, I hope they stick with it, and I hope that I don't influence anything. I hope they are not malleable. I hope they have a vision and they stick to it and they realize it in the best way that they can. I think this whole open door policy with their storytelling, never wanting to commit to give us cool speculation, never wanting to commit to the direction the universe is going, damages the story way more than anything else. I like people to have a vision. I like it to be auteured more than designed by committee and really go down that line. But that's just my opinion anyway. Alright, the next question is from Tech427, who says, hey WP, if you could sit down and talk with any person in the Guild Wars universe, who would it be? What would it be about? I would talk with the ancient god of death, Doom. Why would I talk with Doom? A couple of reasons. Number one, I could maybe convince him to go to war again. Maybe he becomes the new god of death again. Maybe he makes Guild Wars 2 a hardcore game, you know, permadeath, bring all that kind of juicy stuff back. But also, if you think about his position in the universe, okay, it would be really easy to say something like the gods, alright? Because it's like, wow, look at these mist travelers, look at all this power they have, look at all this wisdom they have. Yeah, let's have a chat, okay? That would be kind of interesting, but we know that they're deceitful, we know that they're flawed, we know that they're not necessarily going to tell us everything that we need to know. They certainly didn't back during the events of Nightfall. So, why not talk to someone who is in league with them, right, but is angry at them? So Doom will tell me all the dirty details. He'll tell me everything that the regular gods won't. Maybe he'll have a bit of an evil inclination to what's going on. Maybe I'll get manipulated a little bit. I'd like to think, as a very smart Asura, I would see past all that, though. And I would get all the true answers right there. An interesting answer to this question would be to speak to one of the Elder Dragons as well. But I think I'd poop myself a little bit if I tried. Next question, very short, is from Michelle Ashman, who says, please, WP, do you know if ArenaNet are considering housing at all? It would be great for their microtransactions. I know this is a noob question. No, I don't. I don't think they're considering housing. And maybe this is because I don't give a damn about housing. But yes, the personal instances, the home instances, would be very useful for housing. I do not deny that. But I don't think it's worth them going to their effort. That I'd rather have actual content to play rather than, you know, just playing dress up. I think they are content with the home instance now to just keep adding nodes and stuff, whether it be through the gem store, black line chest as we've most recently seen. That's how you'll customize that area. Maybe housing would be like a huge feature of an expansion. But even then, I wouldn't want them to waste time developing the expansion working on housing. I know it's an asked for feature, but I don't think it's worth it. Just like guild halls, I don't think it's necessary or the best use of their resources. Maybe the second expansion, okay, if one of those ever comes. Then we'll talk about housing, but not for a long time. In my opinion, I don't think they're doing anything. The next and final question is from Nyar Papia, who says, this is a bit of a random question, but how do you come up with your screen names like Wooden Potatoes, Concrete Ducks? They're really unique, and I'm just curious where they've come from. Alright, step 1, take a random material, like wax. Step 2, take a random object, like a screwdriver. Both of these things are on my desk right now. Step 3, combine them together, wax screwdriver. Step 4, profit. And that's the way it goes. Anyway, there you go, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you're enjoying. Hope you're having a good day. I will see you again tomorrow. Hopefully very soon I can talk to you about some background Guild Wars 2 projects. But until then, have a great evening, guys, and I will see you next time.